Hope she likes fire. Victor's whisper cut through the smoke, casual as a man ordering dinner. And then the deadbolt slid home. My daughter Clara, my own flesh and blood, had locked me inside the cabin. I was 70 years old, choking on varnish and betrayal, and they thought that night would finish me. They thought $300 million from the Hale Trust would drop neatly into their hands once my ashes cooled. I pressed against the wall, heat radiating through the timber, smoke biting my throat raw. Outside, Clara's heels clicked sharp against the porch boards, the same sound I'd heard since she was 12, and stormed through the house demanding her way. That stubborn rhythm had once meant defiance. Now it meant my executioner was waiting for the fire to do her work. I could have begged. I could have screamed through the door, reminded her of the mornings I braided her hair, of prom nights I waited up with coffee cooling beside me, of the sacrifices that built her future. But Clara had always fed on weakness. She wanted me desperate. And Victor, his voice still lingered in my ears. Not angry, not emotional, just matter of fact. The voice of a man who reduced me to an obstacle in a financial plan. For one awful moment, I almost gave in. Maybe it would be easier to stop fighting, let the smoke swallow me whole. Then Henry's words returned, sharp and steady as if he stood beside me again. Air always knows the way out. He'd said it the summer after wildfire season, when he insisted on retrofitting the cabin with a hidden service hatch and vent, a secret only he and I shared. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought age meant weakness. But I remembered. I dropped flat to the floor, coughing, crawling, every inch a battle but every inch closer to air. And in that searing smoke-filled dark, I made a vow. This fire would not erase me. It would expose them. The night of the fire still clung to me, but to understand it, you have to step back to the day before, when Henry was still alive. Henry had built the Hale family office into a fortress of numbers, $300 million earmarked for philanthropy, investments designed to outlast us both. He trusted me to be its steward, not Clara, and that wound in her never healed. That Sunday morning, sunlight poured through the glass atrium of the estate, glinting on the long mahogany table where Henry had spread blueprints. His hands moved with the precision of a man who still thought in structures and systems, even months after retirement. He tapped the contractor's notes about the cabin retrofit, a code-compliant service hatch, and passive airflow vent. Air always knows the way out, he told me again, eyes crinkling at the edges, a phrase I'd brushed off as one of his simple country wisdoms. I didn't know then it would save my life. Clara entered, without knocking, silk robe swishing, eyes narrowed at the sight of her father and me shoulder to shoulder. She lingered in the doorway, arms folded. Still obsessing over that old cabin? Her tone was clipped, coded in that entitlement she'd cultivated since childhood. Henry ignored the bite. Safety first, he said evenly, as though he hadn't heard her resentment. But I did. I always did. She wanted the papers in her name, the title, the authority. Instead, she'd been left on the outside looking in, the daughter of privilege who believed stewardship was her birthright, yet was never trusted with it. That morning, I caught the flash of something raw in her eyes, not just irritation. Fury. She masked it quickly, sweeping past the table, kissing Henry on the cheek like a dutiful daughter. But her hand lingered on the blueprint of the cabin door, and I swear she pressed her finger hard enough to leave a mark. Henry didn't notice. I did. And though I told myself then it was harmless, a daughter's sulk, deep down I felt the chill. Clara was already drawing her own blueprints, not for safety, but for betrayal. The day after Henry's anniversary mass, the phone rang, just as dusk slipped across the estate. Clara's voice bubbled through the receiver, too sweet, like syrup hiding vinegar. "Mom, let's celebrate at the cabin. Just the three of us. A quiet evening before the trustee vote." Her words came dressed in warmth, but I heard the strain underneath. In the background, Victor barked at someone. Creditors from the sound of it. His voice dropped low, but not enough. If she doesn't get control, we're finished. A door slammed. The line went muffled. Clara rushed back in, tone brittle. "Ignore that. You know how Victor gets when the markets dip. Monday evening, the cabin. I'll bring wine. I stared out the window. Henry's rose bushes, dark silhouettes in the twilight. Part of me wanted to say no, to claim fatigue or a board meeting, but the way she asked, too quickly, too insistently, made me pause. She needed me there, desperately. And desperation has its own smell. I agreed. My voice was calm, measured, the way I'd learned to sound during decades of board votes. Clara squealed, relieved, as if a clock had just been reset. When the line went dead, I didn't move. I thought of Henry's files, the bylaws, the trust documents. The board meeting was 2 days away, and she was racing against time, not toward reconciliation, toward something else. For the first time in 70 years, I felt my daughter circling me not as family, but as prey. I arrived at the cabin just before 8, the September air cool enough to sting my cheeks. Clara greeted me with a too-wide smile, pulling me inside before I could settle my coat. Victor was already there, lounging on Henry's old leather chair as though it were his throne. I set my bag by the door and scanned the room. The fire roared higher than it should have, logs catching too quickly, sparks hissing like they'd been primed. Clara fussed with the wine glasses, her back turned. Victor's eyes flicked toward me, then toward the fire, then back again. He was restless in a way I'd never seen. Not nervous exactly, but taut, like a gambler sitting on a final bet. I sat carefully on the edge of the sofa. The cushions were familiar, but the air wasn't. It pressed on me, heavy and expectant. I glanced down at the rug in front of the hearth. Henry's rug, the one he'd bought at an estate sale, thick enough to muffle footsteps. Only now, standing over it, I felt something else. A faint breath of cool air, whispering upward through a seam. Memory jolted me. Henry lifting that same rug months ago, showing me the service hatch he'd insisted the contractor install. "It's not just a hatch," he'd said, tapping the frame. "It's a promise. Air always finds a way." At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic, but his words carried new weight in that room, filled with smoke-scented shadows. I forced myself to act casual, running my fingers over the wine-glass stem Clara handed me. "Everything looks so cozy," I said lightly. She smiled too quickly, too bright, her lipstick smudged at the corner. "Only the best for you, Mom." The wine was darker than usual, almost syrupy in the glass. I lifted it to my lips but didn't drink. Instead, I studied Clara's eyes. They were fixed on me, not with warmth, but with watchfulness, like she was timing something. Victor shifted again, drumming his fingers on the chair arm, his gaze sliding toward the door. That door with the fresh, gleaming deadbolt Henry hadn't installed. Clara noticed my glance and spoke fast. "Victor thought we should upgrade the locks, just in case." Her explanation was neat, rehearsed. My skin prickled. I didn't confront. I just took a tiny sip of wine, enough to wet my lips, and set the glass down on the coaster. Something was wrong, and the rug's whisper of air reminded me Henry had known this day might come. The wine was wrong. Bitter undertones clung to my tongue, metallic, lingering longer than they should have. Within minutes, my arms felt heavy, my knees slack as if the sofa cushions had swallowed me whole. Clara noticed immediately. She always noticed weakness. Her lips curved, not in concern but in quiet satisfaction. She rose, slow and deliberate, and drifted toward the door. Her fingers trailed along the frame with practiced ease. Then came the sound, not the soft snick of a latch, but the hard metallic chunk of a deadbolt sliding deep into its housing. This wasn't Henry's old lock. The brass was bright, new, a double-cylinder deadbolt, the kind that required a key on both sides. Clara twisted it with precision, then slipped the key into her pocket. The gesture was smooth, rehearsed, muscle memory. And then she turned back, glass in hand, and sat across from me like nothing had changed. The fire roared in the hearth, louder than before. Flames leapt unnaturally high, licking at the edges of the wood. Something had been poured on those logs, I realized. The sweet eucalyptus candles did nothing to cover the sharper tang beneath. Accelerant, chemical, danger. Each breath scraped my throat raw. "Clara," I rasped, voice rough with smoke. I tried to stand and nearly pitched forward, knees buckling. Clara didn't move to help. Instead, she sipped her wine, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Sit, Mom. Don't make this harder." "Harder for who?" Victor leaned forward finally, his voice flat. "Just let it happen. It'll be over quick." That was the moment everything sharpened. The fog in my head didn't matter. My daughter's betrayal, Victor's coldness, the roar of flames. It all fused into clarity. They thought I was trapped. They thought the fire was final. But I remembered the hatch. And I wasn't done yet. I lay slumped on the sofa, every muscle heavy, lungs clawing for air. My body refused to rise. Clara and Victor were already stepping out of the cabin. She watched me from the door, her hand still on the bolt, and Victor leaned close, whispering the same words he'd spoken when this nightmare began. "Hope she likes fire." They thought it was finished. They thought I couldn't get up, couldn't leave the cabin. Clara's eyes lingered on me with a cold certainty, as if she were already calculating the trustee vote without my presence. She didn't rush, didn't fear interruption. To her, I was done. And maybe I should have been. My limbs were lead. My head spun. Smoke pressed down on me like a hand forcing me underwater. For a moment, I let my eyes close. It would have been so easy. Then memory sliced through the fog. The hatch came back to my mind again. I forced my body off the sofa, crashing to the floor on my hands and knees. My arms shook, but I crawled, dragging myself toward the hearth. The rug's edge brushed my fingertips. Beneath it, I felt the faint exhale of cooler air. My salvation. The latch resisted, my fingers trembling too hard to grip. At last, the hatch creaked open, and a draft swept across my face, sharp and clean. I pressed my cheek to it, sucking in air like medicine. Then, inch by inch, I slid my body inside, scraping my shoulders against the narrow frame. The tunnel was dark, suffocating, but the pull of fresh air guided me forward. My knees scraped raw, my palms burned. Smoke chased me down the passage, but the draft pulled harder. And then, with one last desperate shove, I spilled onto the earth outside. Gravel bit my palms, pine needles clung to my arms. I coughed until my chest seized, but the night air was mine. Behind me, the cabin burned high, its flames clawing at the sky. Clara's scream carried through the crackle. Not grief, but rage. She had counted on smoke, on fire, on my surrender. She hadn't counted on Henry's hatch. They thought I couldn't get up. They thought I couldn't leave. But I did. By the time I stumbled down the dirt lane, my chest rattled with every breath. My nightgown clung with sweat and soot. The fire's glow lit the trees behind me, but I kept moving until porch lights appeared ahead. Ruth's place. She opened the door before I could knock. Her face froze, then drained of color. "Margaret, good Lord, what happened?" Her hands, always steady from decades of nursing, reached for me, dragging me inside. I collapsed onto her sofa, coughing so hard I thought my ribs would snap. She wanted me to shower first, but I stopped her. My voice was shredded, but my mind was sharp. Pictures. Now, before anything washes off. She hesitated only a second before fetching her phone. The camera clicked, catching soot streaks down my arms, the red patches blooming across my skin, the singed hem of my nightgown. She zoomed in on the blister at my wrist, the smoke grime around my mouth. Every photo felt like a shield, proof they couldn't twist or erase. Only then did she lead me to the bathroom. I stood under the water until it ran black at my feet. My skin stung raw, but at least the stink of chemical smoke slid off me. I wrapped myself in one of Ruth's towels and sat while she pressed a cool cloth to my forehead. But Ruth wasn't content with photographs. She drove me to the urgent care clinic, ignoring my protests. "Medical record?" she insisted, her jaw set. "They'll need more than stories." The nurse's pen scratched fast across her chart. Smoke inhalation, chemical exposure, superficial burns. Each note was another anchor, tethering my experience to paper, making it undeniable. While Ruth filled out insurance forms, I studied my reflection in the waiting room window. My eyes were bloodshot, my lips cracked, but beneath the damage, I saw something steadier. Resolve. Clara and Victor had tried to erase me. Instead, they'd left a trail. Photographs, reports, witnesses. When we finally returned to Ruth's house near midnight, she tucked a quilt around me on her guest bed. "Sleep now," she whispered. But I couldn't. I stared at the ceiling, smoke still thick in my memory. Clara's smile, Victor's whisper, the sound of the deadbolt. They circled in my head. They believed fire would silence me. Instead, it had lit the first torch of my fight. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that bolt slide, smelled the varnished smoke, tasted the bitterness of Clara's wine. At dawn, I gave up and sat at Ruth's kitchen table, wrapped in her old quilt, my lungs still raw. Ruth bustled around making coffee, jaw tight with the kind of anger that simmers deep. She'd known Clara since childhood. She'd watched her grow into that polished, brittle woman. Now she muttered under her breath, Henry would roll in his grave. Then she picked up the phone. "Max," she said, her voice firm, "I need you." An hour later, a man in his 70s stepped into the kitchen. Max Turner, retired investigator, once with the state's fraud unit. He looked like an unmade bed in corduroy, but his eyes were sharp as glass. He didn't waste time on sympathy. Instead, he pulled a notepad from his jacket and clicked his pen. "We start clean, public records first, then a sworn insider, then your recording. Finally, a judge. That's the order. No skipping steps, no mistakes." His tone was matter-of-fact. I told him everything. The wine, the bolt, the smoke, the hatch Henry had insisted on. My voice broke once, but Max didn't flinch. He only nodded and kept writing. When I finished, he tapped his notes. "It's a conspiracy case. Paper trails don't lie. People do. Our job is to prove it." Ruth poured him coffee and asked the question gnawing at me. "How much danger is she still in?" Max leaned back. "They think she's dead. When they learn she isn't, they'll panic. Panic makes people sloppy. That's when we catch them." I shivered, clutching the quilt tighter. Sloppy could mean mistakes we could use. But it could also mean a second attempt. Max seemed to read my mind. "That's why you don't go back to the estate. Not yet. You stay put. We build the record." He slid a burner phone across the table. "Use this from now on. No calls from your landline. Assume they're watching." For the first time since smoke filled my lungs, I felt something besides rage or fear. I felt strategy. A plan. Proof that I wasn't walking this road alone. Clara and Victor had their plot. Now I had mine. By mid-morning, Max had his laptop open on Ruth's dining table, the screen glowing with county records. His fingers moved faster than mine ever could, navigating databases and archives with the patience of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Start broad," he muttered. "Fire reports, death certificates, property filings. Look for overlap. Patterns tell the story." I sat beside him, still wrapped in Ruth's quilt, sipping tea to soothe my throat. Max clicked through file after file, and then he stopped. "Here." He turned the screen toward me. A cluster of obituaries, all recent, all women around my age, all within 2 counties. Their death certificates bore the same notary stamp, the same signature. "That's odd," I asked. "Suspicious," Max corrected, "especially when the same notary shows up on financial petitions the same week." He pulled up trustee documents, printed in legalese, that made my head spin. Petitions filed before the deaths were even public. That's not a mistake. That's a system. Ruth leaned over his shoulder. "Who runs the office?" Max zoomed in on the filings, tapping a name that appeared again and again. Patricia Lane. I felt my stomach drop. Lane had been Clara's shadow for years, her advisor. Always at family functions, always whispering in corners. I'd assumed she was just another lawyer eager for hail money. Now her fingerprints were everywhere. Max didn't look surprised. "Every scheme has a paper queen. Patricia's yours." She pre-files, smooths over inconsistencies, makes the fraud look routine. Without her, Clara and Victor wouldn't get past the first clerk. He printed the documents, sliding them into a folder. Each sheet felt heavier than paper, like bricks for a case we were stacking one by one. Ruth touched my hand. "You've got them, Margaret, piece by piece." Max nodded, already turning back to the screen. "This is just the start. Next, we need someone inside her office to swear under oath. One signature, that keystone, and the whole thing collapses." I sat back, my chest tight, but not from smoke this time. From something fiercer, the knowledge that their careful system had just been spotted by a man who knew how to dismantle it. They thought fire would erase me. Instead, it lit a trail straight to their door. By early afternoon, Max had his folder thick with printouts, arrows scrawled across the margins, timelines taped together like puzzle pieces. But he kept repeating the same phrase: "Paper alone won't win it. We need someone inside." Ruth, never one to waste time, made calls. By 2:30, we were sitting in the back booth of a diner off Route 9, the kind of place that smelled of coffee grounds and fried onions. Across from us sat a young woman with trembling hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. A lawyer was beside her, his presence both protective and warning. Her name was Allison, a junior clerk from Patricia Lane's office. She couldn't meet my eyes at first. "I didn't sign up for this," she whispered, voice shaking. "I thought it was just estate work, paperwork, nothing like this." Her lawyer gave a small nod, and she pulled a folder from her bag. Inside were copies of filings. My filings, except these weren't after-the-fact records. They were dated days before the fire, days before I was even supposed to be dead. One page made my stomach twist. A death notice. My death notice, complete with a certification stamp and storage ID number. Filed, logged, waiting to be activated the moment the fire consumed me. I reached for the page, but Max held up a hand. "Let her explain." Allison's voice cracked. "Patricia had us pre-file everything. Trustee petitions, death certificates, even financial transfers. She said it was routine, that wealthy clients wanted to streamline the process, but last week she was very specific. Margaret Hale, file it early. Don't ask questions." Her lawyer slid a signed statement across the table, notarized, every detail spelled out. Document IDs, storage locations, names of staff who handled the entries. It was all there. I pressed my fingers to the cool Formica tabletop, steadying myself. Seeing Clara's betrayal in her eyes had gutted me. Hearing Victor's whisper had enraged me. But this, seeing my own death scripted on government paper, froze me cold. Ruth leaned forward, fury in her voice. "You understand what this means for Margaret? For her life?" Allison's eyes brimmed. "I do. That's why I'm here. I couldn't carry it anymore." Max tucked the affidavit carefully into his folder. He didn't smile, but his tone softened. "This is the keystone. Paper tells part of the story. A sworn insider makes it real. Now we can move." I sat back, the diner noise humming around me, and let the weight of it sink in. They had written me out of existence before the fire ever started. But the very system they trusted had just delivered me my first undeniable witness. And with her, the balance began to shift. The courthouse smelled of dust and disinfectant, its hallways echoing with other people's grief and grievances. Max carried our folder under his arm. Ruth walked close beside me, and I tried to breathe past the knot in my chest. This wasn't a trial. Not yet. It was only a preliminary hearing, a judge reviewing whether our stack of proof could move forward. The walls felt too quiet, too private. No jury, no gallery, no sign of Clara or Victor. Just us, the clerk, and the man in the black robe who held the next gate closed or open. Max laid out Ruth's photographs first, the soot streaks on my arms, the blister at my wrist, the scorched fabric of my nightgown. I wanted the judge to see what I had lived, to feel it press into his hands. But he frowned, shaking his head before Max had finished. Chain of custody is broken. No officer on scene, no time-stamped handoff. These images are inadmissible. He pushed the photos back across the table, as if they were nothing but family snapshots. The words hit like a blow. Those pictures weren't just evidence. They were the scars I carried, proof that fire had almost taken me. Now they were gone with one ruling. Ruth bristled, her face flushed. So what? She survives an attempted murder? And that means nothing? The judge's tone was flat, bureaucratic. Bring authenticated evidence. Until then, we proceed on record alone. He tapped his gavel lightly, and the matter was done. Outside, sunlight glared harsh on the marble steps. Max spoke low, steady. Setbacks happen. The affidavit still stands. We keep building. But I felt gutted. Clara and Victor had expected me to vanish into smoke, and here I was, fighting to prove I'd even existed in that cabin. And even when I clawed my way out, the system brushed it aside like smudges on paper. That evening, Ruth went to drive us back from the clinic, and that's when she saw it. A small black device clinging under her bumper, a faint blink pulsing in the dark. Max confirmed it with barely a glance. Tracker, they're nervous. I stared at the light, my throat tightening. They still thought I was gone. But someone close to them was checking, waiting, making sure. The judge had dismissed my scars. But Clara and Victor weren't finished. And neither was I. The judge's ruling still rang in my ears. Photos tossed aside like they were smudged postcards. Evidence erased before it could speak. Clara and Victor still believed I was dead, and in that gap between their certainty and my survival, I saw my opening. I sat at Ruth's kitchen table, pen shaking slightly in my hand. On her stationery, I wrote one line, "You forgot. I know the way out." No signature, no explanation. Just Henry's words, sharp as a blade turned back on them. Ruth's neighbor delivered it by courier, anonymous and clean. I could almost picture Clara's manicured hand tearing the envelope open, expecting a condolence card, maybe an old debt notice. Instead, finding me, alive, watching. The phone rang less than 3 hours later. Clara's name glared across the screen. My pulse hammered, but I remembered Max's advice and tapped record before answering. Arizona law was on my side. As long as I was a party to the call, it was admissible. "Hello, Clara." Her scream split the line. "She's alive. She'll ruin everything." Panic thrashed through her voice, raw and real, nothing rehearsed or polished. I didn't interrupt. I let her own words bury her. Then Victor's voice surged in, rough and venomous. "Then we finish it. Do you hear me? We finish it." The call cut off in a slam. My hand shook as I set the phone down, recorder still glowing red. Ruth's eyes were wide. "You got it, didn't you?" I nodded. Every word. Max arrived within the hour. He didn't waste time on comfort, just played the recording twice, jaw set. "That's it," he said. "That's probable cause. With Allison's affidavit and this tape, we can push for warrants. Their words, not yours. That's what turns suspicion into charges." Max wasted no time. The moment he left Ruth's house with the recording, he was on the phone with his old contacts, his voice clipped and steady. By early evening, we were no longer pleading victims. We were complainants with evidence in hand. Agents met us in a quiet office off Central Avenue. 2 men, 1 woman, all business. They listened as Max laid out the chain. Public records with Patricia Lane's name, Allison's sworn affidavit, and now the call. When my own voice came over the speaker, calm against Clara's hysteria, I saw the shift in their faces. Suspicion hardened into belief. Victor's snarl sealed it. "Then we finish it." The lead agent stopped the playback and shut her notebook with a snap. "That's conspiracy and attempt. Clear as day. With the affidavit, we've got probable cause for search and arrest." She looked at me directly. "Mrs. Hale, you'll need protection until the warrants are executed." For a moment, relief trembled in me. The fight was no longer mine alone. The law had entered the room, but the relief carried its own chill. If Clara and Victor panicked this much before they knew I was alive, what would they do once doors started breaking down? Ruth touched my shoulder gently. "It means they won't get the chance to try again." The agents were already moving, one drafting paperwork, another on the phone to a magistrate. The quiet office buzzed with the machinery of justice cranking into motion. I sat still, listening, absorbing the reality. My daughter and her husband were about to be treated not as family but as suspects. Part of me still reeled at it. Clara, the little girl with flour on her nose, the teenager slamming doors, the woman who kissed Henry's cheek even as she plotted against me. Now she was the target of federal warrants. Victor, too, the man who once held my grandson in his lap, who toasted family dinners, now snarling into a phone call that would carry him into custody. When we left that office, the night air felt sharper, colder, but cleaner somehow. The kind of air Henry had promised would always find a way out. The hunt was no longer mine. It belonged to the law now. The next afternoon, the estate felt like a stage set for a play I'd never imagined acting in. The Board of Trustees was due to vote in less than 48 hours. Clara and Victor thought they were in control. What they didn't know was that every word, every glance, would now be captured under lawful wire. The agents had been methodical. They briefed me in Ruth's kitchen that morning, spreading diagrams of the Hale estate across the table like a battle plan. Family meeting, one of them explained. You don't bait them. You don't accuse. You ask open questions. Let them speak. We'll do the rest. They armed me with a wire so small I could feel it only when I pressed my palm against my blouse. Another device hid inside a leather-bound notebook, Henry's old board minutes, the perfect decoy for me to carry into the room. I won't lie, my hands shook when I looked in the mirror before leaving Ruth's house. At 70, I'd never imagined myself rigged like an informant. But survival had already burned away shame. If wearing wires meant truth finally had a chance, I'd wear them gladly. The agents escorted me discreetly to the estate, blending into service vehicles parked just out of sight. From the porch, the house looked unchanged, its windows gleaming, the lawn manicured. But I saw it differently now. Not as a home, but as the arena where betrayal had reached its peak. Inside, Henry's chair waited at the head of the long dining table. I lowered myself into it, the leather creaking under my weight, and for a moment I placed my hand where his had rested through countless meetings. A silent promise. I will not falter. The air was still, heavy with expectation. The board packets lay neatly stacked. Clara's agenda, typed and glossy, sat ready to usher me out of the trust once and for all. But today the current ran the other way. Today the stage belonged to me, not to them. When the clock struck 3, I heard the front door open. Heels clicked against the marble, a sound as familiar as it was ominous. Clara's brittle voice carried through the hall. "Mother, we're here." Victor followed, shoulders tense, eyes darting, sweat already beading his brow. They looked confident on the surface, but the cracks were there. And this time, every word would be caught, every lie preserved. I straightened in Henry's chair, board packets before me, wire humming faint against my chest. The confrontation was no longer a fantasy. It was seconds away. Clara swept in first, brittle as glass, her smile too quick. "Mother, you're confused. We only wanted to help." Her voice tried for warmth, but landed hollow, trembling at the edges. I let the silence stretch until it bit. Then I laid a board packet flat, sliding a single page toward them. "If that's true, explain this." Clara glanced down. The heading read, "Petition for Trustee Transition." My name crossed out, hers inserted. The filing date, 3 days before the fire. Her smile faltered, then stiffened. "You must be mistaken. Paperwork gets filed all the time by accident." I reached for another page, this one clipped from Allison's sworn affidavit, though they couldn't know the source. Accidents don't usually include death certificates. Especially not mine. Victor coughed, a sharp bark meant to break tension. "You're sick. That smoke rattled your mind. We were just protecting you." "Protecting me?" I repeated softly. I lifted my gaze to Clara. "Then why did Patricia Lane file my death certificate?" Her face went white, the color draining like water from a broken glass. For the first time in years, Clara didn't have words. Victor leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Don't twist this. Everyone does it. Streamlining paperwork, anticipating transfers. It's routine." The wire under my blouse hummed steady against my skin. Agents were listening, every syllable captured. I kept my breathing calm, even as my heart raced. I leaned back into Henry's chair, my voice level, quiet but cutting. Routine. Is that what you call locking your mother in a cabin and hoping she never walked out? The silence after my question hung heavy, like smoke all over again. Clara stared at the board packet, knuckles white around her wine glass, lips pressed so tight they blanched. Victor shifted in his chair, his nerves spilling out in every twitch of his fingers. I leaned forward, voice soft, measured. Earlier, at the cabin you said, "Hope she likes fire?" What did you mean? Clara's head snapped up. That's absurd. You must have misheard. You were delirious, Mother. But Victor wasn't as careful. He gave a short laugh, harsh and brittle. Everyone does it. Fires, doctors, it's routine. You make it sound dramatic. I kept my face neutral, though my heart pounded. The recorder light, hidden in Henry's board minutes, glinted faintly in the lamplight. Agents outside would be leaning closer now, headphones filling with Victor's arrogance. Routine, I repeated. My tone carried no accusation, just the faint curiosity of a woman asking about the weather. Tell me more. He shrugged, loosening his tie as if this were nothing. You think yours is the first? People smooth transitions all the time. Insurance, estates, trusts. It's cleaner when no one drags it out. Clara hissed his name, but he waved her off, the smugness overtaking sense. He thought he was justifying himself. He didn't realize he was confessing. I reached for the bylaws, flipping pages slowly, deliberately, giving him room to speak. And he did. It's not personal, Victor added, eyes locked on me. We had creditors waiting, deadlines. You sitting there holding everything up, it wasn't sustainable. This is how it's done. I set the bylaws down carefully, palms flat against the table. My voice was quiet, but the words landed sharp. You mean murder? That's what's done? For the first time, Victor faltered. His mouth opened, then shut. He realized too late the trap he'd walked into. Clara slammed her glass onto the table, liquid sloshing. Enough. This isn't a courtroom. But it was. Every second was testimony, every word evidence, and I wasn't the one under oath. I leaned back in Henry's chair, calm settling in my bones. You're right, Clara. This isn't a courtroom. Not yet. Victor's words still hung in the air, the room trembling with the weight of what he'd admitted. Clara's glass wobbled in her hand, wine dripping onto the bylaw pages she'd once thought would crown her queen of the trust. Then the sound came, a sharp knock, 3 beats on the front door. Before either of them could move, it swung open. Agents poured in, voices firm, badges glinting. Federal warrants. Nobody move. Chairs scraped back in a panic. Clara screamed, the sound raw and shrill, echoing off Henry's paneled walls. She clutched the table as if it could anchor her, but the agents pulled her arms behind her, metal cuffs snapping shut. Victor went pale. His swagger collapsed, his mouth opening and closing like a man gasping for air. He raised his hands high, muttering, "It was just business. Just business." His wrists were shackled all the same. Neighbors had gathered outside. Through the tall windows, I saw them craning necks, cell phones raised. For years, Clara had paraded her image of elegance, charity galas, glossy magazine spreads, the dutiful daughter of Henry Hale. Now the world would see her screaming, wrists bound, mascara streaking down her cheeks. One agent nodded toward me. "Mrs. Hale, you're safe now. Safe." The word felt strange, foreign. My heart still pounded, but not from fear. From the surge of power returning after being stolen, after fire and betrayal had tried to erase me. As Clara was led past, she twisted, her eyes burning into mine. "You ruined everything." I didn't rise from Henry's chair. I only watched, calm and steady, the way Henry used to during board disputes. "No, Clara," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." Victor didn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, already defeated. The door slammed behind them, leaving the estate in silence except for the faint hum of the recorder still tucked in my blouse. Every word captured, every admission sealed. The house smelled faintly of eucalyptus from Clara's perfume, but underneath was something stronger, the clean, sharp scent of justice at last. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning, reporters jostling for position, cameras flashing. I kept my head down beneath Ruth's wide-brimmed hat, but the sound of it all, the chaos, the questions, felt like vindication. Inside, the prosecutors moved quickly, their words clipped and formal. Charges filed: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, racketeering. Clara and Victor's names on every page, but they weren't alone. Patricia Lane's name surfaced too. Organizer, the prosecutor called her. The woman who had smoothed the paperwork, filed the false notices, stitched together the fraud like it was just another day at the office. The indictment named her as the architect, the paper queen Max had warned us about. I sat quietly in the gallery, the quilt of survivors around me. Ruth at my side, Max behind with his arms crossed. Every motion, every filing, tightened the noose around Clara's empire of entitlement. Outside, a man I didn't recognize approached me, his voice low. Mrs. Hale, my aunt. She was on Lane's list. Fire in her cabin last year. They said it was faulty wiring. His eyes filled, his voice breaking. You saved others, not just yourself. The words hit me harder than any gavel. Clara had nearly made me just another obituary in a cluster. Lane had turned death into routine business, and if I hadn't crawled out, inch by inch, others might never have been connected to the truth. The prosecutor's press conference was short, direct. This is not just about one family. This is about a conspiracy, preying on the vulnerable for financial gain. Today, that ends. Cameras popped, reporters shouted questions, but I didn't linger to hear them. I slipped through a side exit, Ruth steady at my elbow, Max close behind. Outside, the morning sun hit my face, warm and sharp. For the first time in days, I drew a deep breath. Not smoke, not courthouse dust, but clean air. That was how it ended. Not with Clara's voice, not with Victor's threats, not even with Patricia Lane's paper trail. It ended with the law taking their names and writing them where they belonged, on indictments. They had tried to erase me. Instead, their empire was collapsing, and I was still standing, alive and breathing. The very next evening, I stood at Henry's grave, the courthouse dust still clinging to my shoes. In my hand, his old watch ticked steady, just as it had every morning of our life together. They tried to burn me, Henry, I whispered, placing the watch on the stone, but air knows the way out. The Hale Trust Board had voted earlier that day. I remained steward. Clara's chair sat empty. Victor's name struck out. Lane's empire dismantled by subpoenas. Their fire had only cleared the ground for something better. I signed the first new grant that afternoon, funding for elder protection investigations. The money they tried to steal would now protect others, like me, women written off as weak, easy to erase. I looked at Henry's name carved in stone, then up at the sky burning amber with sunset. Fire doesn't erase truth, I told him. It only makes it shine brighter. I walked away lighter, not because the past was gone, but because I had carried it through the flames and survived.